I have a box of tea in my cupboard. Ordinary black tea, the kind you buy without thinking about it, in a paper box that's been sitting there since I don't even remember when. I've had tea in my house my whole life. My parents had it in theirs. It's not a special object. It's the least special object I own, which is exactly why I never once looked at it closely. Here's the thing I never stopped to ask. Somebody decided this plant, out of all the plants on Earth, would be the one growing in a valley in northeast India, thousands of miles from where it started. Somebody moved it there, on purpose. Somebody chose that valley over every other valley, in a decade I couldn't have named until I started looking into this. And I never once wondered who, or how, or what was growing in that valley before it arrived, or what happened to whoever had been managing that land before someone decided it should grow tea instead. Between 1851 and 1903, the British Telegraph Network needed insulation for its underwater cables. It came from a tree in Malaysia and Borneo called Palaquium gutta. Historians estimate as many as 90 million mature trees were felled to make it happen. That is the number I kept returning to. And the more I looked at it, the more the box of tea on my counter began to feel different. I wasn't the only one who noticed something was off about how ordinary these plants feel, not even close. When I started asking around, I found the same quiet unease in other people. Someone mentioning they'd read that coffee, chocolate, rubber, sugar, almost nothing in a normal kitchen actually originates where it's grown now. Someone else saying they'd always vaguely known that, and never once asked why. A friend who grows tomatoes telling me she'd never thought about who first decided which plants belonged where or what got cleared to make room. It's not a fringe feeling. It's not a specialist concern. It's a shared, never quite named unease about something nearly everyone owns and almost no one examines. We accept that the world's kitchens got rearranged at some point in history, and we accept it the way you accept weather as a background fact, not a decision anyone made. How did this become so ordinary, a plant growing thousands of miles from its origin, in soil it has no history with, tended by people whose grandparents never grew it when it is, when you actually look at it, deeply strange? Here's what we've always been told. Victorian botanists built institutions like Kew Gardens out of scientific curiosity, cataloging the world's plants to fight famine and disease. They moved cinchona from the Andes to India to treat malaria. They moved rubber trees from Brazil to Southeast Asia to build industry. They moved tea from China into Assam to feed the empire. All of it, the story goes, in the name of progress and public knowledge. I want to be honest. That explanation is not nothing. It's reasonable. It rests on real evidence. Kew really did send quinine that treated malaria in British India. Serious people, working under a genuine scientific mission, built real botanical knowledge from this effort. Kew was nationalized in 1840 under Sir William Hooker specifically to organize this kind of transfer, and it did organize it, carefully, for decades. This isn't a story about a hoax, and it isn't a story about villains twirling mustaches in a greenhouse. It accounts for almost everything, almost, between 1828 and 1849. A botanist named Nathaniel Wallich compiled a catalogue of over 20,000 plant specimens collected for the Royal Botanic Garden in Kolkata, the very institution responsible for moving tea into Assam. The catalogue carefully recorded Latin names, collection numbers, and even the names of the local field collectors who found the plants, men like Kamrup and Francis de Silva, working in regions like Sylhet and Kumon. What it didn't record was anything those same collectors knew: the Swidden rotation cycles, the companion planting, the seasonal management practices that had sustained those landscapes for generations before any of it was catalogued. That knowledge simply isn't in the record, not lost by accident, as far as anyone can show. Left out, while the plant itself and the collector's name attached to it were preserved with tremendous care. Which means the tea in my cupboard, the box that feels so ordinary, sits in that gap, in the space between what we've been told and what the specific record shows. And then I found it somewhere else, In a document I wasn't even looking for it in. Not a similar thing. The same thing, almost word for word. In 1892, on the other side of the Bay of Bengal, a botanist named Henry Ridley planted over 2,000 rubber trees directly inside a forest reserve in Singapore called Bukit Mandai. This was years before anyone was commercially growing rubber in the region, before there was even a proven market for it. Ridley wasn't just cataloging a specimen the way the Kolkata catalogue had. He was using a public scientific gardens land and institutional standing to test and seed a monoculture crop ahead of demand inside land that was supposed to be reserved forest. The official record calls this economic botany a garden doing its job, introducing a useful plant to a region that could grow it well. That much is documented and true. What it doesn't explain is why a conservation institution, the one entity with a mandate to study and protect biodiversity, was the one clearing space inside a forest reserve to plant a monoculture crop before anyone had asked it to. Two instances, different countries, different decades, the same gap in the same place. And that box of tea sitting in both of them, grown under the same institutional model, moved by the same kind of hand. In Malaysia and Borneo, colonial trading firms blamed the collapse of the Gutta-percha tree, the one behind that 90 to million number, on what they called indiscriminate native harvesting. The record shows something different. Indigenous Orang, Asli, and Malay collectors had tapped the tree, which they called taban, for generations, using methods that drew the latex without killing the tree. It was European telegraph firms' demand for cable insulation that pushed whole tree felling instead faster, cheaper, and permanently destructive. Even the tree's name in the historical record is imperial. Gutta-percha wasn't the local word at all, and it collapsed two distinct trees into one commercial category. Distance from previous instance, about 1,000 miles. Same specific silence about who actually knew how to manage the resource sustainably, replaced by a story that blamed the people who'd protected it for generations. In St. Louis, Missouri, opened in 1859, the Missouri Botanical Garden built one of the first great American herbariums, over 100,000 specimens under its founding curator, Dr. George Engelmann. It's still one of the most respected botanical institutions in the world. The endowment that funded it, though, came from real estate and hardware fortunes made in the same years the tall grass prairie surrounding street. Louis was being cleared for monoculture agriculture prairie that indigenous land management had shaped and sustained for centuries before that. Distance from previous instance, 8,000 miles. A different continent, a different empire entirely, a different language of botany altogether. Same specific thing missing from the same specific place in the record. Different countries, different languages, different centuries. The same specific thing missing from the same specific place in the record. This is not the shape of coincidence. Coincidence scatters unevenly across unrelated events. This clusters tightly around one specific kind of omission, in institution after institution that had no reason to compare notes. And that box of tea is in every one of those places, not metaphorically. Tea, rubber, Cinchona, Gutta-percha, the same institutional model exists in Assam, in Singapore, in Malaya, in Missouri. It's the same kind of garden, the same kind of catalogue, the same kind of erasure, in every jurisdiction the record covers. You were not issued something local, you were issued something global. Here's what the official explanation requires you to accept, not as a conspiracy, as simple arithmetic. At least 4 botanical institutions, on 4 different continents, working under 4 different colonial administrations, run by people who in most cases never met each other, in a 50-year window between 1840 and 1900 Q, Kolkata, Singapore, Missouri, all independently arrived at the same operating pattern: preserve the specimen, catalogue the collector's name, assign a Latin name that erases the local one, and leave out the agricultural knowledge, the soil management, the rotation cycles, the companion planting that had made the plant useful and sustainable in the first place. 4 institutions, 4 empires, and 1 independent American city. one operating pattern. All of it happening without a shared instruction manual, without a single coordinating document telling every garden director on earth to do it this exact same way. I am not saying someone coordinated this. I am saying the coordination problem doesn't have a clean answer inside the official explanation. And the official explanation has never been required to provide one. That box of tea is the product of that coordination, whatever it was, however it happened. You are holding the output of a process that occurred, in some form, across at least 4 institutions on 4 continents, in a window the official explanation calls independent scientific progress, a window in which the world's agricultural knowledge got sorted into what was worth writing down and what wasn't, and almost none of the people who actually held that knowledge got a say in which category their work fell into. If this video helped you see something you'd been carrying without noticing, consider subscribing. There's more of this history sitting in places you wouldn't expect. Henry Ridley in Singapore, 1892. He is walking through the Straits settlements with his coat pockets stuffed full of rubber seeds. He is knocking on the doors of coffee and Gambier planters who don't want them. He wasn't a rainforest destroyer by ambition. He was the garden's scientific director, doing the job the position asked of him. He had perfected what came to be called the herringbone tapping method, thin channels cut into the bark, careful not to reach the cambium layer, letting a single tree keep producing latex for over 20 years without dying. That's not the work of a careless man. That's the work of someone who cared, deeply, about doing his specific job well. Local planters thought he was ridiculous. They mocked him, called him Mad Ridley, Rubber Ridley, turned him away at the door more than once. He kept handing out seeds anyway, for years, to anyone who'd take them. In 1896, one planter, Tan Che Yan, finally planted the first dedicated rubber estate in Malaya. By 1907, another planter, Tan Ka Ki, followed. Within a generation, the region's lowland rainforest was gone, and British Malaya was the center of the world's natural rubber supply. They were not making a decision, they were doing their job, and their job, done exactly as designed, produced the same kind of erasure that shows up in every botanical garden this investigation has touched. Ridley did not know what he was part of, not in the way this looks now. The record does not show that anyone told him. That is either ordinary bureaucracy or the most important thing in this entire investigation. The record cannot tell us which. I want to be honest with you about what I cannot prove, not as a disclaimer, as the most important thing I can say. I cannot prove that anyone at Kew, Kolkata, Singapore, or Missouri intended to erase indigenous agricultural knowledge as a matter of policy. I cannot prove whether this pattern was a deliberate institutional habit, passed down and copied garden to garden, or something that simply emerged on its own from how Victorian science was structured, from what counted as knowledge worth recording in the first place. And I cannot prove that tea, specifically, was ever meant to be anything more than what the official record says it was: a useful crop, identified, moved, and planted in a useful place by people who genuinely believed they were doing something good. What I can show you is the pattern. What I cannot show you is the intent. And I want to be clear, a pattern without documented intent is not proof of anything. It's a shape in the record that the official explanation has not been required to account for. I'm also aware that I've been looking for this pattern for a while now, reading through catalogues and forestry reports, until the pattern started jumping out at me from documents that were never trying to hide anything. Minds that look for patterns find them. That's not a flaw specific to me, it's how attention works for everyone, including whoever's watching this. I'm not exempt from that. What I'm asking you to do is not to trust my pattern recognition, and not to take my word for any of it. I'm asking you to look at the specific documented instances I've shown you: Wallich's catalogue, Ridley's forest reserve, the Gutta-percha trade logs, Shaw's endowment, and tell me whether the official explanation accounts for all of them. It does not account for all of them. That is not my conclusion. That is the gap. There is one thing the record preserved that connects that box of tea to everything I've shown you. It's called the Wallich Catalogue, a numerical list of dried specimens of plants in the East India Company's museum, hand-compiled by Nathaniel Wallich at the Kolkata Garden between 1000 1,828 and 1,849. Somewhere between 12 and 20,000 of the actual dried plant specimens it lists still exist today. Most of them sit in the Wallich Herbarium at Kew, with duplicate sets held at the Central National Herbarium in Kolkata. It's a real, physical, visitable collection, open to anyone who asks. Each sheet has a Latin name, a catalogue number, and the name of the person who found it: Francis de Silva, Kamrup, Robert Blinkworth, Gomez. Names that were recorded faithfully even as everything those people knew was left out. It survived because the system that processed everything around it didn't recognize what it was preserving and didn't recognize or didn't care what it was throwing away in the process. That box of tea is in my cupboard right now. It was there before you watch this. It'll be there after. Nothing about the box has changed. Same paper, same weight in my hand, same faint smell when I open it. What's changed is what I know about where it came from. About the 50-year window in which gardens like it appeared everywhere at once. About Ridley, handing out seeds in Singapore in 1892, mocked at every door he knocked on. About the Gutta-percha collectors in Malaya, blamed for a destruction that wasn't theirs. About the Wallich catalogue, recording names but not knowledge. About 4 institutions on 4 continents that built the same kind of garden in the same kind of decades, with no documented reason for why they all agreed to leave the same thing out. That box of tea was not created for you. It was created about a plant moved, catalogued, and separated from everyone who had ever known how to grow it properly, in a system that repeated itself in Assam, in Singapore, in Malaya, in Missouri, without ever once being asked to explain why. It was processed into existence by an institution that had a specific designation for what the plant was, and no designation at all for what the people who'd farmed it for generations actually knew. The Wallich catalogue remains, sitting in 2 herbariums on 2 continents, still holding names without the knowledge those names carried. And if you look at it long enough, it tells you exactly how something becomes ordinary, not through familiarity. Through the completely ordinary act of no one ever explaining why it was necessary in the first place. That tea has been in your life since before you could read a label. You've never been asked whether you wanted it grown this way. You've never been told what it replaced. What would you do differently if you had been?